Rachel, sitting here slowly trying to assimilate to the time change. We just sprung our clocks forward for the springtime here. And anyway, I'm here to quickly recap my reading from March 5th to 11th, 2018. So I thought I'd start with the book that I read this month for my page 112 tag, where I picked between two books given the writing of page 112. The book I finished was The Marrying of CHANI KAUFMAN by Eve Harris. I did not like it as much as I liked the book I chose last month, although it had rather large shoes to fill in that respect. This book was okay. It chronicles the courtship of CHANI KAUFMAN in the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi community in London, but it takes the conceit of starting on the wedding day and then moving backwards. So it's a romance plot, but you already know how things will end, and I feel like you can go more into characters this way. I really appreciated it. There's also an homage to Jane Austen. There's a altercation between CHANI and her future mother-in-law, which was much like Darcy's aunt and Lizzie getting it on in Pride and Prejudice. So sure, a lot of people could appreciate that. I mean, I think there is a lot to be said about similarities between like Austen's novels and communities like the Haredim, because they have these rigid rules and societal structures that are kind of similar in how rigid they are. And then there's another story in this, which is about the Rebbetzin, that's the word for the rabbi's wife, and it goes into her courtship with the rabbi and sort of the strain on their marriage in the middle years. The rabbi and the Rebbetzin are what are called Balei Teshuvah, which means that they were secular Jews who decided to become more religious. I thought that there was some good stuff in here. It was long listed for the Man Booker in 2013, but I did think in a way that I wish the two novellas, because that's how I saw them, were separated, that there was a little too much going on. And particularly in the Rebbetzin story, there was sort of a last-minute shocker that I thought took away from what they were building up and the tension beforehand, the stuff that was actually on the page that I wish that they had dealt with. And there seemed to be a rather quick resolution to that story that was funny that when I did the page 112 tag, I read a section of the Rebbetzin and the rabbi, and I thought it was so nuanced and layered, and I still think it was, but at the end of their story it was just like Harris was rushing through it and it was a little more shallow. But overall, I really appreciated it. I also liked the CHANI and her fiance Baruch's storyline, because it gave real dimension to these Haredi characters, and they were more than just stereotypes or mouthpieces for their community. They had layers, but they also weren't wanting to leave their community. They were just, you know, individuals within it. So that's what I appreciated about this story. Next, as has been my custom these last few weeks, I just finished a Virginia Woolf novel. This is Between the Acts. It is her final novel, which was published posthumously, and in fact there's a foreword in the beginning by her husband that said that she wasn't completely finished with proofing it, but he felt relatively confident that it was good enough as is for her tastes. Of course, we won't know exactly what she would have done had she lived, but this is an interesting introspective look at things for the end of her life. I mean, it's hard to separate, I guess, this being her final novel, so final that it was published after her death. It takes place all within one day in 1939, on the cusp of England joining World War II, and certainly of all of her novels, it's the one that references World War II the most. There are characters who talk about you know, taking sojourns in Italy and whether that's safe, and talking about dictatorships and Jewish refugees and the Germans and so forth. And in fact, the major plot of the novel is that there's a play going on at this country estate where the gentles sit and watch the merchant class put on a play for their amusement. and the play at one point is interrupted by airplanes. So there's that sort of tension about what's to come within world events. But as usual, Woolf is mostly interested in character moments between these specific people, like in the Gentles family, the Oliviers, the Olivers. There's the patriarch of the family, who is a retired veteran of from India, and his sister, the widow, Miss Swithin, and then the patriarch's son Giles and his estranged wife Isa. And then we also go into some guests who come to the play, and we also get a little bit of a perspective from the writer of the play who's watching it play out, Miss Latrobe. So it's interesting. The play is this pastiche about English history told in 4 parts, going from the Elizabethan age to quite unsettlingly for the audience to the modern age, where the mirrors are turned on them. And there's a lot of questioning, and I guess not a lot of answers, about the meaning of art. And from Miss Latrobe's POV, I think we just get how dedicated she is to the idea of art, and how she's sort of seen as this no-nonsense boss lady in getting her art off the ground. And otherwise, the Olivers are an intriguing family. The older siblings, Bartholomew and Lucy, they're kind of set in their ways. I had a soft spot for Lucy as this older woman who's sort of dismissed as being a floozy, and her nephew Giles especially has absolutely no use for her. And I think this is the second time also in the years there's an aunt-nephew combo like this, sort of. And then there's this strange strain between Isa and Giles, where Isa just thinks of him begrudgingly as the father of my children, and meanwhile she has eyes mostly for a farmer. I mean, she just thinks about starting a relationship with him, although it doesn't go anywhere, and Giles is being pursued by this rather aggressive woman called Mrs. Montessa. And I think it's interesting the way that Woolf juxtaposes the actual play with the audience interacting between the acts. And then at the end, it's like real life is sort of like a play. In those final moments, Giles and Isa are finally about to really talk to each other. And Woolf, I think, kind of goes grandiose and talks about how, the area around the house has existed forever, and as the sun sets, people throughout the ages have been looking at the sky, and then the curtain rises on real life and the couple is about to speak, and so forth. And so it's interesting. Maybe like a microcosm meditation on life before Woolf's death. Again, probably putting a little too much thought into the Woolf's death part of this, but a small little novel here to finish out my month-and-a-half long Virginia Woolf reading project. I gotta admit, I'm a bit relieved that I can check this off. And just in time for my next reading project, where I'm going to start my Big Sammy Roar nonfiction reading project, where I'll read 3 books per each year that the nonfiction prize was awarded to an emerging Jewish author. Starting with the year 2008, and specifically with this book. It's called The Price of Whiteness, Jews, Race, and American Identity by Eric L. Goldstein. These nonfiction titles are just so long, I gotta look at them to make sure I get every word. And I showed this in my library haul video from a couple of weeks ago, but I figure now I will read from the flap to give a fuller extent about what this book covers. What has it meant to be Jewish in a nation preoccupied with the categories of black and white? The Price of Whiteness documents the uneasy place Jews have held in America's racial culture since the late 19th century. The book traces Jews' often tumultuous encounter with race from the 1870s through World War II, when they became vested as part of America's white mainstream and abandoned the practice of describing themselves in racial terms. American Jewish history is often told as a story of quick and successful adaptation, but Goldstein demonstrates how the process of identifying as white Americans was an ambivalent one, filled with hard choices and conflicting emotions for Jewish immigrants and their children. Jews enjoyed a much greater level of social inclusion than African Americans, but their membership in white America was frequently made contingent on their conformity to prevailing racial mores and on the eradication of their perceived racial distinctiveness. While Jews consistently sought acceptance as white, their tendency to express their own group bonds through the language of race led to deep misgivings about what was required of them. In addition, while they often attempted to assert their social superiority over African Americans, they often found that feelings of empathy and identification for blacks complicated their efforts. Today, despite the great success Jews enjoy in the United States, they still struggle with the constraints of America's black-white dichotomy. The Price of Whiteness concludes that white Jews' status as white has opened many doors for them, but it has also placed limits on their ability to assert themselves as a group apart. I feel like as the end of this blurb did, I should point out that not all Jews are white, so not all of us would fit into this white group, racial group, so easily. A lot of us would, but not all of us. And yeah, this is something that I've been preoccupied with for a while, about the lines within American Judaism about ethnic identity versus white identity. I guess something I'm so aware of is that unless you're ultra-Orthodox, you tend to not be easily identifiable as Jewish. Or I guess some rabbis across all streams who wear the kippot. But anyway, and it's something I think about a lot, especially in our racial landscape of today, where some people stick out more than others. And I'm especially interested in you know, how this isn't a one-dimensional issue. There's a lot of complications in the idea of race, and with Jews in this case, and I'm sure and surely that it's the same for other groups as well, but I am very interested in taking a deeper look into the idea of race and the American Jewish experience, and yes, I'm very excited for this. I hope it won't be too dry and academic, but we'll see how I do. And to go along with the idea of Jews and race in America, I also thought I'd start this fiction book for my Jewish book club that I talked about again in my library book haul. This is Among the Living by Jonathan Rabb. I read the synopsis in that video, so I thought I'd just quickly recount that it's about a Holocaust survivor in the late 40s who moves to Georgia to be with his last remaining relatives, and he comes across the schisms between the progressive Jewish movements, conservatism and reform movements, and that's a little strange to him. And then he also comes across the black family that works for his own family, and what they have to deal with in the Jim Crow South, and it's a bit of a reflection on the similarities between the black experience and the experience of the Holocaust survivors. And so there's just going to be a lot of more identity issues in this book from a more, I guess, emotional and character-specific way than the academia of the other book. But I'll be very curious about how ideas from that book play into this book. And that about covers it for me, rambling on as usual, hoping to make some sense. I've really been very appreciative of my reading, especially this week, because midweek I started a new job, well, a temporary position within my job where I'm working with new people for the first time in a long time. So it's been an interesting learning curve. I'm doing somewhat similar things to what I did in my normal position, but it's with new people in a new place and slightly new parameters, so it's nice to have the comfort familiarity of books to lean on during this time, and I'm sure I'll continue continue to appreciate that as I go forward. I hope that books bring you solace when confronted with any sort of change in your life. I always like something to ease me into changes. And I hope that you all have a great week, whatever you're up to. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.